I never imagined that one reckless night would turn my entire life upside down. After spending the evening with a man whose name I didn't even know, I discovered I was pregnant. My first reaction wasn't excitement or hope, it was panic. I had just graduated from college, my savings barely covered groceries, and I couldn't even afford the medical procedure I believed I needed. While I sat alone wondering how I was supposed to solve this impossible problem, something unbelievable happened. Strange floating words suddenly appeared in front of my eyes as if invisible people were commenting on my life. They claimed the man I had slept with suffered from infertility and that the twins growing inside me were his only chance to have biological children. According to them, if I ended the pregnancy, his enormous fortune would eventually belong to another woman's future family instead. At first I thought I was hallucinating, but the comments kept arguing with each other like viewers watching a television drama. Some insisted I should keep the babies because they would inherit a fortune, while others argued that the wealthy man would probably deny everything. I wasn't interested in anyone's money. Honestly, I only wanted him to help pay half of the medical expenses. That sounded fair enough. The real problem was that I had absolutely no idea who he was. Before I could learn anything useful, the mysterious comments disappeared. Days turned into weeks, and nothing happened. I searched my memory countless times, trying to remember every detail about that night, but alcohol had erased most of it. Nearly a month passed before the floating messages returned. This time they talked about a successful businessman named Ethan Carter, a man hopelessly in love with another woman. They explained that he had been drugged by a rival and had accidentally knocked on the wrong hotel room door while trying to escape. The wrong door happened to be mine. Reading further made my face burn with embarrassment. That evening I had mistaken Ethan for the escort I had impulsively ordered after discovering my boyfriend had cheated on me with a colleague. Before the poor man had time to explain why he was there, I had dragged him inside. The comments joked that he had escaped criminals only to fall into the hands of a heartbroken drunk woman. I wished the floor would open beneath me. Even worse, after everything was over, I had quietly slipped away before sunrise because I was too ashamed to face him. With a name finally in hand, I searched until I found Ethan sitting inside an elegant cafe with a beautiful woman. I immediately guessed she was the woman everyone kept calling the heroine of this strange story. I waited outside until she left, then forced myself to approach him. My legs felt weak, but I had already come too far to run away. "Excuse me," I said nervously. He looked at me politely but with complete confusion. "Have we met?" Clearly, he didn't recognize me. Taking a deep breath, I asked the most awkward question of my entire life. "About 2 months ago, were you staying at a hotel near Central Avenue?" His expression instantly changed. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What exactly are you trying to say?" I quickly handed him the medical report folded inside my bag. "I'm pregnant," I admitted quietly. "I don't expect anything from you except help paying half the medical costs." He stared at the document for several long seconds before asking the obvious question. "You're saying the baby is mine?" I nodded without hesitation. "I've never been with anyone else. If you doubt me, we can do a DNA test as soon as it's possible." His gaze became colder. "Do you understand what happens if you're lying?" Oddly enough, his warning didn't frighten me. I knew the truth was on my side. Looking directly into his eyes, I answered calmly, "I'm not lying. Besides, I may have been the one who pulled you into my room, but you weren't exactly forced. I think sharing the medical expenses is reasonable." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then, to my surprise, the floating comments appeared again, practically laughing. They called me foolish for asking only for hospital fees when I could have secured my children's future forever. Others joked that I was somehow both incredibly timid and unbelievably brave at the same time. Ethan finally broke the silence. Instead of refusing, he suggested we go to a private hospital immediately. There, doctors collected blood samples for a non-invasive prenatal DNA test. The results would be available within 24 hours. Afterward, he insisted on driving me home. I tried to decline several times, but his calm determination left little room for argument. During the drive, he quietly explained that he had never intended to enter my room that night. Someone had arranged a trap for him, and he had only wanted to borrow a phone. My face grew even hotter as I confessed my own mistake. I honestly thought you were someone else, I admitted. I'd just learned my boyfriend had been cheating on me. I drank far too much and made the worst decision of my life. Instead of judging me, Ethan simply listened. After a long silence, he asked, "Have you been trying to find me all this time?" "For about a month," I replied honestly. He nodded slowly before saying something I never expected to hear. "If the child is mine, I'll take responsibility. Not for us, but for my child. I'll make sure both of you are financially secure." I blinked in surprise. I had convinced myself he would want nothing to do with this pregnancy, yet here he was promising to protect the baby. Secretly, I felt relieved. Whatever happened between us, my child would at least have a future. The following morning, Ethan called before I had even finished breakfast. His voice sounded calm, but there was a seriousness beneath it that made my heart race. "The test results are ready," he said. "Can we meet?" Less than an hour later, we were sitting across from each other in a quiet cafe. He didn't waste time with small talk. "The DNA test confirmed everything," he said. "The babies are mine." "Babies?" I froze. "Did you just say, babies?" He nodded once. "The ultrasound shows you're expecting twins." My mind completely stopped working. Yesterday I had been worried about scraping together enough money for a medical procedure, and now I was learning that not only was I carrying 2 children, but their father was one of the wealthiest men in the country. Before I could recover from that shock, Ethan calmly continued. "I'll cover every expense related to your pregnancy, delivery, and recovery. During your pregnancy, I'll transfer $1 million to you each month. After the twins are born, you'll receive another $10 million. I honestly thought I had misheard him. I had prepared myself to negotiate for a few $1,000s at most. Instead, he was offering an amount so large that I couldn't even process it. The floating comments exploded around me. They screamed at me to accept immediately, joked that I had accidentally turned $40 into a fortune, and begged me not to ruin everything by saying something awkward. Unfortunately, saying awkward things was one of my greatest talents. I cleared my throat. "That's much more than I expected." Ethan studied my face. "Is it insufficient?" "No." I almost shouted before lowering my voice. "It's more than generous." I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus on the things that mattered most. "I have conditions too." He nodded. "Go ahead." "I'm their mother. That never changes. I want to stay involved in their lives, and I want to see them regularly after they're born." He answered without hesitation. "You'll always be their mother. I would never separate them from you. You can see them whenever appropriate. At minimum, once every week." Relief washed over me. Then another question crossed my mind. "What about the woman you love?" His expression became unreadable. "She'll know the truth." "Will she accept this?" He looked away for a brief moment before replying quietly, "She'll have to." Something about that answer left me uneasy, but it wasn't my place to interfere with his private life. Lawyers would prepare a legal agreement, my rights would be protected, and our children would have a secure future. That was enough for me. We shook hands across the table like 2 business partners closing an unusual contract. The floating comments nearly lost their minds. They joked that we had created twins first and only afterward introduced ourselves properly. 3 days later, the mysterious messages returned while I was eating crackers to calm another wave of morning sickness. They warned me that the woman Ethan loved, Sophia Bennett, would soon learn about the pregnancy. That evening, Ethan called again. Sophia wants to meet you, he said carefully. Every instinct told me that sentence never ended well. She only wants to talk, he added. The floating comments immediately advised me not to believe that for a second. I asked if I could bring a friend. Ethan agreed immediately. Unfortunately, I didn't actually have any close friends in the city. I had moved there because of my cheating ex-boyfriend and never had the chance to build a new life before everything collapsed. So I went alone. Sophia was already waiting inside a private dining room when I arrived. She was every bit as elegant and beautiful as people described. She welcomed me warmly, ordered tea that she knew was safe during pregnancy, and apologized for what had happened that night. She even thanked me for unknowingly protecting Ethan when he had been in danger. At first I almost believed she was genuinely kind. We spoke politely about my family, my studies, and my plans. Then she reached across the table and gently touched my hand. I hope we'll always be honest with each other, she said with a soft smile. What exactly do you want from Ethan? The floating comments suddenly returned in a flood. They warned me that every word mattered and suggested she might even be recording our conversation. I carefully pulled my hand back around my teacup. Honestly? I answered. I want a healthy pregnancy, healthy babies, and to remain part of their lives. That's all. She watched me closely. Nothing else? Ethan already told me he loves someone else. I'm not interested in chasing a man whose heart belongs elsewhere. Something flickered in her eyes before she smiled again. That's very mature. No, I corrected quietly. Just realistic. She ended the meeting with another warm smile, and for a moment I wondered if I had judged her unfairly. 2 weeks later my phone answered that question for me. My pregnancy suddenly became headline news across every gossip page on the internet. At first they hid my identity, describing me only as a poor graduate carrying the children of a billionaire already devoted to another woman. By evening my name, my photographs, and even my university graduation picture were everywhere. Thousands of strangers accused me of trapping a wealthy man with pregnancy. Others called me a gold digger who had carefully planned everything. Sophia posted only one short public message asking people to treat me kindly and not judge too quickly. Everyone praised her kindness. The floating comments, however, insisted she had personally arranged the leak while making herself look compassionate. I quietly took screenshots of every article, every message, and every suspicious coincidence, saving everything inside a folder on my computer. Then I called Ethan. Have you seen the news? I asked. Yes, he answered immediately. I'm handling it. Did you ask Sophia if she was involved? There was a pause. She wouldn't do something like that. His certainty hurt far more than the articles themselves. I ended the call politely, but after hanging up I realized something important. I had entered this strange situation expecting only financial difficulties. I had never imagined I would become an unwilling character inside someone else's complicated love story. Over the next several weeks, the situation only became more exhausting. The internet slowly lost interest, but strange incidents kept happening around me. One afternoon a package arrived at my apartment even though I hadn't ordered anything. Inside were herbal supplements claiming to support women's health during pregnancy. The floating comments appeared immediately, warning me that the ingredients could be dangerous for expecting mothers. I didn't touch a single pill. Instead, I photographed everything, kept the packaging, and added it to the folder I had been building. A few days later, while waiting for a prenatal appointment, a cheerful woman approached me with a microphone and introduced herself as a journalist hoping to tell my inspiring story. Before I could answer, the comments informed me she wasn't a journalist at all. I politely excused myself and walked straight to the nurse's station. The woman disappeared before security arrived. The third incident bothered me most. Sophia called me personally. Her voice sounded warm and full of concern. She told me she worried that I might become emotionally attached to Ethan and suffer when things inevitably became complicated. The comments practically shouted over one another, insisting she was recording the call and searching for anything she could later twist against me. I thought carefully before answering. Sophia, I said honestly, when I found out I was pregnant, I had less than $50 in my account and was trying to figure out how to afford a medical procedure. I'm far too busy trying not to throw up every morning to build romantic fantasies about a man who has already told me he loves someone else. She fell silent for a moment before quietly saying, "You're surprisingly practical." "It's the only way I know how to survive," I replied. She ended the conversation politely, and the floating comments congratulated me for giving her absolutely nothing she could use. Time passed quickly after that. My stomach grew larger every week, and every examination showed that both babies were healthy. To my surprise, Ethan attended every appointment himself. I had expected his assistant or lawyer to handle everything, but he always arrived on time, carrying a notebook filled with questions for the doctors. He had obviously been studying medical articles about twin pregnancies. During one appointment I couldn't help smiling. "You've done your homework," I teased. He looked almost embarrassed. I wanted to understand everything. The doctor explained another ultrasound image, and without thinking Ethan gently turned the monitor toward me first so I could see our sons clearly before he looked himself. It was a tiny gesture, but somehow it stayed with me long after the appointment ended. Even the floating comments noticed it. They kept insisting that Ethan was slowly changing without realizing it himself. I ignored them. Falling for him would only make my own life harder. When I reached my 7th month, Sophia unexpectedly joined one of the hospital visits. Ethan hadn't mentioned she would be there. She greeted me warmly, sat beside me in the waiting room, and behaved perfectly throughout the examination. I almost convinced myself everything was finally settling down. Then, after Ethan stepped away to speak with the doctor, she quietly approached me in the hallway. "You look exhausted," she said kindly. "That's normal when you're carrying twins," I answered with a tired smile. She nodded sympathetically before lowering her voice. "The media attention has been difficult for everyone. I have friends in the industry. I could make those articles disappear." I looked at her carefully. "That's generous." In return, she continued softly, "I'd like you to give Ethan a little more space emotionally. Not physically. Just, don't become someone he depends on." The floating comments exploded so violently I almost laughed. They had been predicting exactly this conversation for weeks. I calmly met her eyes. "Sophia, I know you were behind the leak." She didn't react. "I've documented everything," I continued. "The online posts, the suspicious package, the fake journalist, every conversation we've had. My aunt always taught me that keeping records is free insurance." For the first time since we had met, the smile on her face looked strained. "I think you're misunderstanding me." "No," I replied quietly. "I don't think I am." Just then Ethan returned. He looked between us with obvious confusion. "Everything all right?" Sophia answered before I could. "Of course. We were only chatting." I smiled politely. "Everything's perfectly fine." That evening I told Ethan absolutely everything. I showed him my folder, the screenshots, the photographs, the suspicious deliveries, every detail I had carefully collected over the previous months. He listened without interrupting until I finished. Then he sighed heavily. "Sophia wouldn't intentionally hurt anyone," he said at last. My heart sank. "I have evidence," I answered. "Would you like to see it?" He rubbed his forehead. "She's under tremendous stress. She's probably overwhelmed by everything that's happened." I stared at him in disbelief. "Ethan, I asked you for help paying half of a medical bill. I never agreed to become collateral damage in your relationship." He had no answer. I left before either of us said anything else. After that night I didn't disappear. I simply stopped making myself available. I answered his messages a day later instead of immediately. I skipped one joint appointment and sent him the doctor's report afterward. Every conversation became polite, brief, and completely professional. The floating comments watched all of this with increasing panic. They claimed Ethan was losing sleep, calling repeatedly, even waiting in the lobby of my apartment building for hours hoping to catch me by chance. I didn't know whether to believe them, but I also refused to let myself care. Then one evening he called again. This time his voice sounded completely different. Quieter. Humbled. I reviewed everything, he said. My security team investigated the leak, the fake journalist, and the online accounts. Your documentation was accurate. I stayed silent. I confronted Sophia, he continued. She admitted she panicked. She also accused you of deliberately trapping me that night. I closed my eyes. I was drunk, I reminded him softly. I thought you were someone else. I left before sunrise because I was embarrassed. If I had planned to trap a billionaire, asking only for half the procedure cost would have been an unbelievably poor strategy. Another long silence followed. Finally, he said words I had waited months to hear. I believe you. I should have believed you from the beginning. I'm sorry. I leaned back against the sofa and let out a slow breath. The apology couldn't erase everything that had happened, but for the first time since this unbelievable story began, it felt as though someone had finally chosen the truth instead of the illusion they wanted to believe. Only a few weeks later, my sons decided they had kept us waiting long enough. At 38 weeks, after a long and exhausting labor, 2 healthy little boys entered the world screaming at the top of their lungs. I cried the moment I heard them. Not graceful movie tears either, I sobbed uncontrollably from relief, exhaustion, and happiness all at once. Ethan stayed beside me through every hour of labor. He wasn't particularly skilled at comforting me, but he never once stepped outside or complained. He simply stayed. When a nurse carefully placed one of our sons into his arms, I watched his expression soften in a way I had never seen before. The confident businessman disappeared, replaced by a father who could barely believe the tiny child looking back at him was real. For the first time since the floating comments had appeared in my life, they remained completely silent, as if even they understood that this moment didn't need anyone's opinion. Unfortunately, peace didn't last long. While I was still recovering in my hospital room, Ethan stepped out to speak with one of the doctors. A minute later the door opened, and Sophia walked inside without knocking. She stood quietly at the foot of my bed, looking far different from the calm, elegant woman she always pretended to be. That should have been my life, she whispered. I should have been the one giving Ethan children. I looked at her steadily. But you never wanted children, I answered. Weeks earlier the floating comments had revealed that she had repeatedly rejected every conversation about marriage or starting a family. She flinched slightly but quickly recovered. You manipulated him. I slowly shook my head. No. You kept him close because you enjoyed being loved. You didn't want to marry him, but you also didn't want anyone else to have him. I was supposed to be an unimportant side character who disappeared after giving birth, while you remained the center of his world forever. The problem is that real life doesn't follow your script. She opened her mouth to argue, but another voice interrupted us. Sophia. Ethan stood in the doorway holding one of our sons against his shoulder. His face was calm, but his eyes carried a disappointment deeper than anger. I heard everything. The room became perfectly still. He looked at Sophia for several long seconds before speaking again. For 6 years, I believed I loved you. Now I realize I only loved the person I imagined you were. She stared at him silently. Please leave, he said quietly. For the first time since I had met her, she had no graceful smile, no carefully chosen words, no performance. She simply turned around and walked away. That was the last time I ever saw her. A couple of months later another unexpected piece of the story came to light. Ethan's company had quietly continued investigating the incident at the hotel. Financial records, security footage, booking information, and digital transactions eventually revealed that the rival businessman responsible for drugging Ethan had planned everything. The setup had been carefully organized to destroy Ethan's reputation and remove him from an important business competition. The evidence became public during a major corporate conference, and the scandal spread across every news outlet within hours. The floating comments returned one final time in complete chaos. They couldn't decide whether Ethan's calm revenge was terrifying or impressive because he had patiently gathered evidence for months before exposing the people responsible. In the end, both the rival businessman and Sophia lost everything they had tried so hard to protect. Their public engagement quietly ended, their reputations collapsed, and they disappeared from the headlines almost as quickly as they had dominated them. Life gradually became peaceful again. One evening Ethan invited me and the twins to dinner. It wasn't presented as a date, just two parents sharing a meal while our sons slept peacefully in their carriers beside the table. After a long silence, he spoke first. "I'm sorry," he said. I smiled faintly. "You've apologized before. Then let me apologize properly." He looked directly at me. "When you trusted me enough to tell me the truth, I chose the image I'd built in my own mind instead of the evidence right in front of me. You never demanded that I choose between you and Sophia. You simply kept telling the truth and allowed me to realize my mistake on my own." I took a sip of water before answering. "I also kept detailed records. That probably helped." He laughed quietly for the first time in months. "Yes, it definitely did." We both looked at the twins when one of them made a sleepy little noise. Without thinking, we reached toward him at exactly the same moment. Our hands almost bumped together, and we both pulled back awkwardly before laughing. It felt strangely normal. The floating comments floated above us once more, but they sounded different now. Instead of shouting, they simply observed that this was no longer a story about an accidental pregnancy or an unexpected inheritance. It had become a story about two ordinary people learning to trust each other after making more mistakes than either of them cared to admit. Ethan looked back at me. "I'm not asking you to forgive everything immediately. I'm not even asking for another chance today. I only want the opportunity to earn your trust for as long as it takes." I studied him carefully. The confident billionaire I had first met no longer seemed untouchable. He looked like a man who genuinely understood what he had almost lost. "I'm not ready to promise anything," I admitted honestly. "You don't have to," he replied. "I'll wait." And he did. Months passed. He never pressured me, never tried to rush my feelings, and never treated my forgiveness as something he deserved. Instead, he proved himself through countless ordinary moments, late-night feedings, doctor visits, birthday celebrations, bedtime stories, and every tiny responsibility that comes with raising children. Slowly, almost without noticing, I stopped seeing him only as the father of my sons. Much later, at a charity event overlooking the city skyline, I stood beside Ethan while our energetic boys ran excitedly between us, laughing as they pointed at the lights below. The floating comments appeared one final time. They joked that the forgotten side character had somehow become the heroine of the entire story. They said the plot had failed because life had chosen a different ending. Then, just as suddenly as they had entered my world, the comments disappeared forever. Ethan noticed me smiling. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I looked at our sons, then at the city stretching endlessly beneath the evening sky. Not so long ago I had arrived in this city chasing a man who betrayed me. One terrible decision had led me into the strangest journey imaginable. I had nearly walked away from the greatest blessing of my life because I believed I had no other choice. I had gone looking for someone to split the cost of a medical procedure. Instead, I found two wonderful children, a family I never expected, and a future I could never have imagined. I smiled at Ethan and answered honestly, "I'm just thinking about how unbelievably strange life can be." He smiled back. Strange in a good way? I slipped my hand into his, watching our sons laugh together beneath the evening lights. Definitely in a good way.